Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
A wife along with her lover decide to beat her husband to death, but it's not that simple. The second part of our story with a similar plot. Enjoy it! 8 hours later, I turned onto an old logging road leading to my father's hunting cabin, nestled on the bank of a small river west of the Berezynski forest. About 40 kilometers away was a small town with a population of around 5,000 people. When I arrived, it was already light, and I managed to unpack my modest luggage and stoke the cast iron stove. It was late autumn, and although it was still fairly warm during the day, a noticeable frost gripped the ground at night. I lit a candle and covered a small, crudely assembled table with a waffle cloth. I placed a bottle of vodka and a metal shot glass in the center. I sliced some bacon with meat layers, bread, and onions. I drank silently, snacked, and drank again. The success of the first depends on the swiftness of the second one poured. When the first bottle was finished, I took out a second one from my bag but decided not to open it. Enough for today, I thought, and placed the bottle on the windowsill. Time to sleep. I covered the wooden bunk, pressed against the wall, with a wolf skin, threw a sheepskin coat and a pillow on top, and locked the heavy front door with a large iron bolt. Just in case. I lay in blissful half-sleep, a sweet lethargy spreading through my body. For the first time in all this while, I felt calm and at peace. Even my constantly aching spine almost didn't hurt. I glanced at the clock. In the dim reflection of the stove fire, the hands showed 10. Early by city standards. But here, in the forest wilderness, it was already late night. Life, surrounded by wild, untouched nature, seemed clear and simple to me. Wake up at dawn, go hunting, fishing, mushroom picking. Have dinner in the evening and go to bed early. The forest, the swamp, the rifle, the fire, the absence of stress, and a healthy lifestyle contribute to longevity. I should throw everything to hell, settle here, in the wilderness, and live out my life in peace and quiet. I thought, drifting off to sleep. I woke up to the chattering of a magpie. The pest was sitting on a branch of a birch tree right outside the window. Reluctantly, I slid off the bunk and shoved my bare feet into boots. There was a noticeable draft on the floor. The stove had almost died out overnight, and the cold had crept into the cabin. Forest life is great, especially when your pockets are full of money. I had no reason to complain. I received a good fee for my last assignment. But, not knowing how long I'd have to stay here, I needed something to do. First, I decided to thoroughly inspect the cabin. My temporary home was simple but functional. Wooden walls made of unhewn logs, an unpainted wooden floor. Closer to the window stood a long oak table and a wide bench. Opposite the wall was a wide bunk covered with a wolf skin, with a deer skin and several darkened medallions with antlers hanging above it. A cast iron stove was heating in the corner. The cabin was warm and cozy, with a pleasant aroma of burning birch logs. In the far corner, I found a hatch leading to a cellar, well camouflaged and covered with an old rug. I lit a flashlight and cautiously descended the steep stairs. In the basement, I illuminated it with my flashlight. To the right, I saw the entrance to an underground corridor. Curious, I darted into the tunnel, lighting my way with the flashlight. The underground passage was well made. Wooden supports propped up the vault in places to prevent the earth from caving in. After a while, the corridor turned upward and ended with a wooden cover. I gently pushed it with my shoulder, and bright daylight hit my eyes. I emerged outside, shaking off the clinging earth. Nearby, a river burbled. I closed the hatch and headed towards the cabin visible among the trees, calculating that the length of the underground corridor was about 50 meters. My father and grandfather built the cabin. Interesting, why did they need an underground passage? But that wasn't all. When I started cleaning the house, I found a large tarpaulin bag under the bunks, containing a shortened Kalashnikov rifle, 10 loaded magazines, and a Walther PK in a worn holster. What for? Who were my father and grandfather planning to fight against? Eventually, I decided not to overthink it and accepted everything as it was. After all, a weapon is never superfluous and will come in handy. Especially since I know how to handle it. Engrossed in settling into my dwelling, I didn't notice how dark it got. November days are short. I made the bed, stoked the stove, and turned on the radio. On FM, there was nothing but static and crackling. White noise, as they say now. But, to my surprise, I found a radio station on the long wave, lost in time and space, broadcasting in Ukrainian. After talking about the weather, the radio host played music, and soon the cabin filled with the sounds of blues. It perfectly matched my current lyrical mood. The cabin was warm, the stove burned well, and between the double walls, field mice rustled. Gradually they got used to me and started boldly running across the floor, little gray creatures with long tails and curious eyes. I threw them some breadcrumbs, they gnawed at them behind the wall for a while, then reappeared. Apparently, they were tired of loneliness and wanted human interaction. The day faded, and a clear autumn night fell. I put on a jacket and stepped out to inhale the frosty air before bed. The full moon brightly illuminated the treetops, casting a silvery path to my house. I took a deep breath of the cold air. Not a single animal or bird made a sound. Even the cheeky magpie hid somewhere. I stood on the porch, warming my hands on a cup of coffee. It was so quiet that it seemed I could hear the steam rising above my bright red mug. I sipped the coffee slowly, then looked up at the night sky, with its meaningless constellation patterns. It seemed I had come to terms with defeat. But is it really a defeat to shake off the clinging dirt? I should have done it sooner. I returned inside. I filled the lamp with kerosene and struck a match. Then I prepared a simple dinner. Leaning against the log wall, I relaxed and smoked, listening to the soft music. The flame of the kerosene lamp flickered on the table, unevenly illuminating the cabin. Outside the small window, in the night darkness, trees rustled. Someone unknown always crunches at night when you're alone. The stove smoked slightly, filling the room with the spicy bitterness of conquered autumn. I pressed the gas pedal, and my car quickly gained speed. It raced past the now yellowed meadows, covered with a morning crust of ice. To the right, a small lake flashed by, reflecting the blue sky. It was a fine day, the sun was shining, and a huge flock of gray crows chaotically frolicked in the unexpectedly warm sky. The meadows ended, and plowed fields stretched on both sides, prepared for winter crops. Weaving through the narrow streets of a small town, I entered its central part. After parking the car, I got out and looked around. To the right, the sign of a small cafe totem glowed invitingly. The scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted from the door. I wasn't in a hurry, so I pushed the entrance door and found myself in a cozy room. There was a free table by the window, and I settled opposite the entrance. Can't help it, old habits die hard. A minute later, the waitress brought the coffee. I cautiously took a sip and blissfully smiled. The coffee was indeed excellent. I understand, it will not be cheap. But believe me, it's worth it, said the middle-aged man of a distinguished appearance, releasing a puff of cigar smoke and sipping his cognac. As they say, Paris is worth a mass. His interlocutor snorted skeptically but refrained from commenting. So, do you have such people? The man continued, exhaling another aromatic cloud. There was a pause, as if his conversational partner was mentally weighing options and considering potential candidates. We have such people, he finally broke the silence. But it will take time to gather and prepare them. How much time do you need? At least 2 weeks, the second man replied, pouring a bit more cognac into his glass. As soon as we're ready, I'll let you know. Excellent, I look forward to your call. But remember, my boss needs the best of the best. Leaving the cigar in his mouth, the man stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. The aging gentleman slid across the luxurious leather seat and stepped out of the back door of his Rolls-Royce, carefully navigating through puddles on the sidewalk. His fancy shoes alone cost $1,000 a pair, and though he could easily afford new ones, he was loath to spoil the old. Waste was not in his nature. Besides, he didn't want to splatter his trousers an expensive cashmere coat of radical black color with mud. The security guard, clad in new camouflage, respectfully held the door for him while the man checked his reflection in the glass door, ensuring that the knot of his $7,500 tie was equidistant from the tips of his shirt collar. He nonchalantly nodded at the receptionist, knowing she had already spread the word that the boss was in the building. He paused for a moment, critically eyeing the large Christmas tree next to the reception desk. The tree sparkled with multicolored lights and tinsel that twirled and shimmered in gentle air currents. Decorative gifts were laid out beneath it. No matter that it was still late November and nearly a month and a half till Christmas. A little holiday spirit never hurt business. Ascending to the 12th floor in the express elevator, the man headed to his office, admiring the antique Roman marble used for the flooring and walls along the way. Quarried from the ruins of a 2,000-year-old villa once ravaged by barbarians, it had been transported here for a fortune. The marble contrasted beautifully with the rich red and black woodwork decorating his spacious corner office. Expensive marine monster paintings by talented animalist artists adorned the walls, complementing various artifacts. Above his desk hung a real ship's wheel from an ancient caravel, salvaged from the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Between the paintings were skillfully crafted shark and ray taxidermy, their sharp teeth accentuating the enchanting charm of the office. Plus, the luxurious antique furniture and the enormous desk made of aged oak from New Zealand added to the grandeur. Woolen rugs of bright tribal patterns were scattered across the floor. The entire wall-sized window offered breathtaking views of the ocean and mountains. He sighed and smiled contentedly. It had been a long journey from nothing to this place. Today, he owned the entire building from top to bottom. His company had long been debt-free, and its value now ran into the billions of dollars. The office's owner stood by the window, looking out at the world, feeling immense satisfaction. Life was good. Though Christmas and New Year were still far off, it was time to think about what to gift himself. First, there was the idea of acquiring a Ferrari Scaglietti, though its price of $4.8 million was quite steep. The Lamborghini Agoista was only $2.6 million. Initially, the man contemplated buying both cars. He could afford it. True, it would require expanding the garage already filled with Rolls-Royce, Porsche, and Corvette. But in the end, he decided to wait a bit longer. There was plenty of time to ponder. The door opened silently, and his assistant, Ingrid, entered, carrying a tray with a cup of steaming aromatic coffee. The beans had been processed through the digestive system of a civet, a creature resembling something between a raccoon and a cat. The beans were handpicked from their feces and imported from Indonesia, costing anywhere from $100 to $500 per pound depending on availability. But the coffee was incredible, and the man shared it only with his best friends. Ingrid carefully placed the tray on the Lombard table and laid out the morning Cape Town newspapers. Then she paused, her blue eyes fixed on her boss. Jürgen Kurt, a 55-year-old billionaire, owner of a global steel manufacturing company, looked at the young woman and smiled affectionately. They had been connected not only by work for many years. For a while, he silently admired her slim figure, reaffirming his opinion that she was stunningly beautiful. 32 years old, 23 years his junior, but he always felt an inexplicable desire for her. She had been with him from the very beginning, from the moment he could afford to hire a secretary. A young, energetic, 20-year-old girl fresh out of college with a business management degree, eager to start working. She had a failed marriage and a small son from her vanished student husband. Jürgen couldn't recall the child's name but knew he must be about 12 by now. "Is there anything else?" He finally broke the prolonged silence. "Mr. Lorenz has arrived," Ingrid said softly, avoiding his gaze. "Send him in. And bring more coffee." Jürgen settled into his chair and turned on his computer. The workday had begun. "This will be a magnificent trophy. It will adorn your home museum," exclaimed a short, stout man sitting across from Jürgen, waving his hands and almost shouting. "Can you imagine a prehistoric shark weighing several tens of tons?" Jürgen smirked skeptically as he glanced at his laptop screen. Megalodon, a species of extinct shark from the Otodontidae family, existed during the Miocene and Pliocene epochs, though there's some controversial evidence of both older and more recent findings. Megalodon was one of the largest fish of all time. Its size is difficult to determine, but the study of fossil remains, mainly teeth and vertebrae, suggests it was gigantic, reaching up to 15 meters in length, making it one of the largest marine predators in our planet's history. The fossil remains indicate that Megalodon was widespread and numerous. Likely a super predator at the top of the food chain, at least until the emergence of organized toothed whales like orcas. Bite marks on the fossilized remains of marine animals suggest they fed on small cetaceans, sirenians, pinnipeds, and large fish, consuming them alive or dead. The bite force of the largest megalodons probably reached 10.8 tons, easily cracking a small whale's ribcage. But this is a fossil shark. Jürgen cut off, clipping his cigar and reaching for the matches. Are we going to chase long-extinct sharks? Not at all. There's verified data that this predator has been seen in the Marianas Trench, near a small uninhabited archipelago. Initially thought to be a giant great white, but then realized to be an unknown species of giant sharks. There are photographs. They identified it as Megalodon. Lorenz placed several color photographs in front of Jürgen. Are these not photoshopped? Jürgen peered intently at the image. I've had our experts check them, and they unanimously agree, no. Lorenz fidgeted in his chair. Suppose I agree to this venture. I have a suitable vessel for sea hunting. But we need trained people, specialists. And most importantly, reliable ones whom I can turn my back on. Jürgen glanced around at the sea monster taxidermy surrounding him. They must be few but a cohesive team. Jürgen! Such people exist. If you're in principle agreeable, I'll immediately call my agent in Ukraine, and he'll start assembling the team. The short man sipped his now cold coffee. Ukrainian? Jürgen grimaced. Nonsense, don't believe the bought and paid for writers. There's none more reliable than them today. Lorenz inquisitively stared at the host. So, what's your decision? There's my Christmas gift, thought Jürgen. Why not? Fine, proceed. Everything must be finished 2 weeks before Christmas. The team should arrive in Cape Town by December 10th. Jürgen pressed the intercom button. Ingrid, invite Captain Seymour to see me. And locate my daughter. In early December, snow finally fell, marking winter's claim. Large snowflakes heavily blanketed the ground, sugaring the pines surrounding my cabin. Thin ice formed on puddles, cracking easily under my steps. The snow tightly enveloped the short firs huddled near my home, while the ground beneath them lay silent and still, only the branches creaking under the weight, periodically dropping cold white crumbs. I sensed the snow in the pre-dawn hours. Half asleep, I saw the snowfall intensify, feeling as if the world around me was being enveloped in a thick white shroud. A deafening silence prevailed, as if everything awaited the unveiling of paintings crafted by the incoming winter. What fully woke me was the sound of a car engine. I cautiously got off my bed and, shivering from the cold, approached the window. A large black car had stopped right outside the cabin, and Uncle Maxim and some unknown guy struggled to get out. They stared at the house as if expecting a wizard from the Emerald City to appear. I threw on my coat, tucked a Walther into my belt, and stepped onto the porch. It was slightly frosty but windless. The white snow dazzled my eyes and muffled sharp sounds. There lies the whole problem. Uncle Maxim put down his empty cup. Excellent coffee. So, what do you think about it? Joined his companion, whose identity was unknown to me. Uncle Maxim hadn't introduced him. I have one question, I said, looking at the newcomer. I know what you're about to ask. I'll answer right away. Snake worked solo. No one hired him to eliminate you. Seems he freelanced in his free time, Uncle Maxim grimaced. Bit off more than he could chew. Good job taking him down. What's your decision? The stranger fidgeted on the bench. Are you in? Who else is on board? I asked. You know them all. Barkon, Moose, and Document. You're the fourth, Uncle Maxim watched for my reaction. You're in charge, ZDAN. I agree. When's the flight? Tomorrow. I'll send you the tickets. You'll fly via Kazakhstan, then Istanbul, and from there to Cape Town. Uncle Maxim stood up. Don't bring anything. You'll get everything upon arrival. And finally put away your gun. The car doors slammed, the vehicle slowly turned around, and soon disappeared behind the trees. I watched it for a while, then went in to pack. Charlotte Kurt arrived in Pretoria early in the morning. A car sent by her father was waiting for her, but she decided to have a coffee at a small airport cafe. The sun had not yet risen, and it was cool inside the cafe without the air conditioning. Charlotte was in no hurry. After all, what was there to rush for? Or rather, for what? At 35, she had no family, no husband, no children. The reason was the latter. She had no children and never would. She remembered the words of Professor Francois Lettier. "You're just unlucky, madam. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do to help. You're infertile." And that ultimately decided everything. Charlotte had been through 3 marriages, each ending almost identically. Her husband would find a mistress who could bear him a son or daughter and leave his infertile wife. Her last marriage had ended just the same. Just yesterday morning, Charlotte found out her husband's mistress had borne his child 6 months ago. Pierre, avoiding eye contact and stuttering nervously, had asked for a divorce. Charlotte had just nodded, too exhausted to say anything. She booked a ticket and flew to South Africa to her father from Paris-Orly Airport later that afternoon. She could no longer stay alone and feared she might harm herself. There were no seats on the flight to Cape Town, so she booked the next flight to Pretoria and called her father to send a car for her. Her father understood something had happened from her voice but didn't ask questions. He promised the car would be on time. Charlotte paid for her coffee, put on her large, face-covering sunglasses, and settled into the back seat of her father's Rolls-Royce. Henry, her father's personal driver, smoothly started the car. Charlotte was born 35 years ago to a young engineer. Her father was only 20 at the time of her birth, in his 3rd year of engineering college in Pretoria and working part-time at a steel mill. At a party, he met the charming Clara, the daughter of the chief engineer. Despite being only 16, Clara was stunningly beautiful. Jürgen fell in love at first sight. A spark flew between him and Clara, so bright that a month later, Clara discovered she was pregnant. Then everything followed, the parents' screams, attempts to make Clara have an abortion. But the young couple, already officially married by then, moved to Cape Town. Jürgen got a job at a small machine repair workshop, and Clara carried their child. Then tragedy struck. Clara died in childbirth, leaving a newborn girl in the hands of her young husband. Grieving, the young father immersed himself in work and raising his daughter. He hired a nanny, who also helped with household chores. Then his mother-in-law came and took over the child's care. Jürgen never remarried, convinced no woman would want someone else's child and fearing that remarrying would traumatize Charlotte, the name he gave his daughter. Time passed, and Jürgen's hard work began to pay off. He managed to create a vast steel empire worth billions. It seemed there was no place on Earth without a YFO Steel Company enterprise. Everything was under Jürgen's control, except one thing. He had no grandchildren, hence no heirs to his business. Understandably, everything would go to Charlotte. But then what? Who would steer YFO? This worry gnawed at his heart. He never discussed it with Charlotte, but she felt her father's anguish. Her phone rang. It was her father. "Lotta, you'll be taken to the villa. We'll meet tonight. Very happy about your visit. Yes, we have an informal reception tonight. I'd love for you to join. You're my beauty. There will be new people. You'll like it. See you in the evening." He hung up. The woman sighed. The last thing she needed for complete happiness was receptions. Well, the evening was still far away. She closed her eyes and dozed off to the sound of the car engine. Charlotte glanced at the large clock on the wall. It was 6 in the evening. Her father had not yet arrived, but the guests had already begun to arrive. Sitting on the edge of the vast bed, she was putting on her stockings. She lifted her leg with a fresh pedicure and pulled on the black lycra. A true lady, even in summer, never goes to events with bare legs. It's beyond the bounds of decency and the domain of naivety. After attaching the stockings to the black garter belt, Charlotte stretched out her legs, checking them thoroughly. There couldn't be a single wrinkle or, God forbid, a snag. Regardless of what anyone said, legs were the most critical aesthetic element of a woman's appearance, even more so than the face. Her legs were perfect, straight, well-shaped, without corns, protruding bones, or scuffs. Her toes were neatly aligned. Before putting on her stockings, Charlotte had rubbed her legs with a fragrant cream that softened and moisturized the skin, with a barely noticeable scent of lavender. A lady should smell pleasant everywhere. Approaching the large mirror framed in carved black wood, Charlotte inspected herself from top to bottom and was overall pleased with her appearance. In black stockings, narrow black Prestigio brand strings, and a black open bra subtly supporting her chest, she looked stunning. She ensured her body had not a single extra hair and her skin remained matte white. Then Charlotte sat down to do her makeup. After finishing, she checked in the mirror to ensure everything was in place and nothing was amiss. She put on a short black dress with an open back, allowing the curious to verify the perfection of her figure and the whiteness of her skin. The outfit was completed with high-heeled Gucci shoes. Charlotte took another look in the mirror and then headed for the door. It was time to present herself to the world. In the spacious hall, there were already quite a few people, clustered around tables set up with bottles of whiskey, grappa, cognac, and vodka. Waiters in white tuxedos moved silently among the guests, trying to offer the necessary drinks on time. Charlotte was slightly surprised. Who was the vodka for? As far as she knew, none of her father's acquaintances drank vodka, except maybe Uncle Roger. But he didn't care what to drink, as long as it burned. Charlotte saw her father making his way through the crowd. He embraced his daughter. "You look magnificent." "Dad, are we expecting someone?" "Who?" "We'll start as soon as the other guests arrive," Jurgen said, glancing expressively at Lorenzo standing nearby. "They're just about to arrive." Lorenzo beamed obsequiously. Charlotte saw the front doors open and several more people enter the hall. Unlike the other guests, they were dressed very simply: jeans, shirts, and army jackets. She noticed the springy gait of the young men, their short haircuts, and blue eyes. The man leading the group caught her attention especially. Her father went to greet them, and they shook hands and patted each other's shoulders for a while. "Who are they?" Charlotte turned to Lorenzo. "They are shark hunting specialists from Ukraine. Your father specially invited them to help organize an ocean safari." Lorenzo seemed about to burst with smugness. The party was picking up. Charlotte found herself beside the man who had caught her interest, almost without realizing how she got there. "George," he introduced himself in decent English, pouring her a glass of dry red wine. Charlotte shuddered at his voice. The young, handsome man had graying temples. Underneath his light white shirt, well-developed muscles were evident. In the deep neckline of the white shirt, amidst his chest hair, was an unusual talisman in the shape of a spearhead, adorned with intricate Eastern ornamentation. It was something warriors might have worn in the past. Charlotte was sure that George was a warrior. His appearance distinctly set him apart from the men she knew. There was something primal, almost animalistic about him, especially the chest hair. All the men she had known so far meticulously shaved off any chest hair. She couldn't have imagined that this would capture her attention and make her lose her head. Charlotte noticed how the socialites at the party looked at him, and she already felt jealous. He wore an unusual perfume, astringent, mixed with the scent of musk. She felt like she was floating in this aroma, losing interest in her surroundings. Occasionally, George would give Charlotte an intense look that made her heart skip a beat. At one point, she realized she was trembling with the desire to be in bed with him. She had already forgotten her latest husband who had run away. To hell with everything and everyone. "Are you an actress?" George suddenly asked, smiling with the corners of his lips. "You have a very expressive face." "And not just the face." The response was ambiguous. Charlotte flirted openly. But the man was not taken aback. He refilled her wine and paid her several more compliments. Then they danced. Charlotte pressed herself against his muscular body, and he caressed her below the waist. They were unconcerned about the presence of other guests. Honestly, nobody else seemed to care about them either. By the end of the evening, Charlotte was quite tipsy. So when George suggested going back to his hotel to continue the fun, she predictably agreed, sending her father a text message so he wouldn't worry. The hotel where the Ukrainian specialists were staying was 30 kilometers away from the villa where the party was held. After letting the taxi go, the man quickly set the table, and soon they were drinking wine and kissing passionately. She surrendered to him without resistance. Everything about George was enormous. As he entered her, Charlotte felt a sweet languor spreading throughout her body. It was so good and pleasant that soon she was overwhelmed by an insane orgasm. The muscles inside her body rippled in response to his thrusts. He looked at her in a way no one ever had before, with a penetrating gaze that noticed everything. Then, without anything, they stood in the shower for a long time, unable to detach from each other, followed by the bed again. Until dawn. They then drank aromatic coffee and made love again. Charlotte only came to her senses the next day when she realized she had fallen madly in love with George. George! Her heart ached sweetly, and butterflies fluttered in her stomach. She couldn't get enough of her beloved. She already called him that to herself, but she didn't dare say it out loud. Men are so timid. Charlotte admired his muscular physique and the bat tattoo on his left forearm. She was afraid to ask about the deep scars on his body and just silently kissed them, feeling a womanly pity for him in her heart. And then it all started again, kisses, thrusts, and the young woman immersed herself in the hot waves of sensual pleasure. Darn, why does everything good always have to end? And usually with a phone call. I slid off the bed and pressed the green button on my phone. Are you still asleep? Doc's voice roared from the phone. They're looking for you. The client expects us at his villa in an hour. He wants to personally brief us, then we're heading to get the equipment. Are you stuck there with a woman? I glanced at the bed where the woman from last night, not exactly a maiden but a young, charming woman, was sprawling with her blonde hair scattered. The clock showed 11 in the morning. Time to hustle her out. Don't yell like that. I grabbed the phone again. Send a car, I'll be ready in half an hour. End of call. What was her name? Charlotte, I think. I gently touched her shoulder. The woman opened her eyes and smiled. Darling, I have to go, they're waiting for me. I glanced meaningfully at the clock. Will we see each other again? She asked anxiously. Hug me. Here we go. As always, the hugs and kisses. I carefully freed myself from her embrace. Let's meet at the club tonight. Vale Club. Everyone knows it here. How about 7 in the evening? Will you come? Charlotte looked at me hopefully. I'll be there. I promised, eager to get away from her. I quickly got dressed, then threw the room key onto the table. Leave it at the reception when you go. Still, I'd like to clarify, what's our main task? You know we don't understand shark hunting, I said, lounging in the armchair and eyeing our host. No one's forcing you to hunt. Your job is security and backup. There's been pirate activity in this sector of the Pacific, and although it's far from the busy sea routes, satellites have detected a gathering of small vessels there. They're not necessarily pirates, but it's always better to be safe than sorry. And the unguarded get convoy protection. I thought to myself, but kept silent. The host eyed me as if wanting to say more. The task is clear. When do we start? As soon as we board the plane. I have security here. The client glanced at the hefty guy standing behind his chair. Why not use your own security during the hunt? I asked curiously. They lack combat experience. The host stood up, signaling the audience was over. Michael will take you to the warehouse where you'll pick your equipment and weapons. He's in the know and will answer any questions you have. The warehouse was in a massive hangar near the host's estate. Wooden olive-colored boxes lined the walls, poking out rifle and machine gun barrels. What kind of weapon do you prefer, Russian, German, or American? Michael asked. Do you have AK or AKM? Preferably with a folding stock. I curiously eyed the grenade boxes. Of course. Soviet, war trophies. Leftover from the war in Angola. I pulled out an AKMS, Soviet-made, not a Chinese one. The metal stock was loose, not surprising for a trophy weapon. I thought of the AKS-74U back home in the cabin. What about Soviet machine guns, like the RPK, for instance? I inquired. Without a word, Michael handed me a brand new RPK, still greased. I checked the action. The mechanism worked fine. I'll take it. I also picked up 3 magazines and a German Walther P38. The others were also selecting weapons. We needed a mounted machine gun for the pirates. I settled on a German MG42, or rather, its modern version, the MG3. After taking a box of F1 grenades, we dressed in German tropical camouflage. Germans do know their army gear. I checked the time. Almost 5 p.m. Time for dinner. Maybe the club was a good idea. We agreed to test fire the selected weapons in the morning. I asked Michael for the club's coordinates and headed to the hotel. Charlotte's room was empty. Gone, it seemed. Despite my vow to avoid women, something about her touched me. A voice in my head whispered, "Why not enjoy her while you can? You've been dumped before." Logical. I'll play this game for revenge. But Charlotte wasn't to blame for my troubles. The music was so loud, it could be heard from afar. Approaching the club, I saw the neon sign. The entrance was guarded by a massive bouncer, ensuring only paying customers entered the temple of roaring music. I was surprised to see a sign stating the club was closed for a private event. Did I get it wrong? The bouncer eyed me suspiciously. "Do you have an invitation?" "Damn it!" I shrugged, then turned to the man at the door. "Listen, I was invited by a friend. Her name's Charlotte. She's definitely here." I tried to explain. The bouncer shook his head. "Entry is by invitation only. I have strict instructions. No invitation, no entry. Nothing I can do. Can you just pass her a message that I'm here?" I tried to keep my cool. I saw the bouncer hesitate. He then said something into his chest mic. A few minutes later, the door swung open and a young woman came out, eyeing me curiously. I repeated my story to her. "Can you prove Charlotte invited you?" she asked. I looked at her in surprise, realizing my acquaintance was well known here. "Of course, tell her George is here," I tried to convey trustworthiness. She seemed to ponder, checking her guest list on her phone and looking at me uncertainly. Finally, she shrugged. Another guard appeared behind her. "I'll let you in, but I hope you won't cause trouble," she turned to the guard. "Let him in." As I passed, I heard her quietly tell the guard, "Keep an eye on him." I walked inside and checked my coat at the cloakroom. The music was even louder, seemingly at its peak. The room was lit with colorful lights, and in the center stood a large nylon Christmas tree. Around it, people of various ages hopped like rabbits, pretending to be happy. A New Year's party, obviously. I started looking for Charlotte, though, to be honest, I would have preferred to catch up on sleep in my room. The previous night, rich in erotic escapades, had left me with little time for rest. I made my way through the dance floor toward the bar, squeezing between dancers. I ordered a double brandy and, sitting on a high stool, faced the crowd. Suddenly, the music stopped. A break. Fine, I'll finish my drink and head home. Thankfully there were plenty of taxis outside the club. That's when a noisy group in a cozy nook near the bar caught my eye. Several flamboyantly made-up women with their dates, apparently quite drunk, were arguing loudly. Then Charlotte entered the room, accompanied by a metrosexual man in tight pants and a too small plaid jacket over a tank top. He was ingratiatingly wriggling beside the young woman, seemingly trying to persuade her of something. One of the guys from the nook stood up and, swaggering like a cowboy, approached the pair. He gesticulated wildly and then grabbed Charlotte by the elbow, dragging her toward his group. It was clear she didn't want to go with him. Her companion quickly vanished to avoid messing up his hairdo. Charlotte helplessly scanned the room, but everyone pretended not to notice. It's always the same everywhere. Just my luck. Every time I go to a bar, I end up in a fight. Resigned to my fate, I stood up. Approaching the brash young man dragging Charlotte, I said, "Young man, the lady does not want to go with you." I was actually enjoying my pronunciation, and surprisingly, he understood me. His response was immediate. A fist whistled past my nose, missed because I dodged. My move didn't escape the attention of his friends. Two more were decisively heading our way. Well, God knows I did everything possible to avoid a fight. I struck the rascal on the biceps with the edge of my palm. His grip on Charlotte loosened. My second strike broke his nose, and he fell to the dance floor, choking on his own blood. Having knocked out the main guy, I kept an eye on the other two. I dodged a side blow to the face and hit the nearest one in the carotid artery. The other didn't even understand how my boot hit his jaw. Within seconds, both were lying on the floor. No one else rushed towards me, except for two gorilla-like blackguards with stun guns quickly approaching. They clearly weren't coming to congratulate me on a clean victory. Just then, Charlotte stepped forward and said something in Afrikaans. The guards abruptly stopped and changed course, starting to pry the sufferers off the dance floor. A few minutes later, other guards approached the noisy group and escorted them out. "You're amazing for coming." Charlotte kissed me as if nothing had happened. "Shall we go to your hotel?" Call me a pushover, but I couldn't deny her. You know how it is. The enormous yacht Charlotte, cruising at a steady speed of 15 knots, confidently navigated through the islands of a small unnamed archipelago, located about 300 kilometers from the Mariana Trench. A light, cool breeze blew, tinged with gold as the sun nearly crested the horizon. Its bright reflections danced like little devils on the ocean's smooth surface. A new day was beginning. Marine inhabitants frolicked near the yacht. Schools of agile, spindle-shaped, white-sided dolphins frequently leaped out of the water along our course. Black and white orcas, slapping their enormous tails as they dived deep and resurfaced with a noisy exhalation, releasing plumes of water vapor. Their pod confidently moved north, paralleling the yacht's course, occasionally flashing their slanted dorsal fins. But somewhere in the ocean's dark blue depths, the world's largest great white sharks circled. And it was here that the megalodon was spotted, capable of ripping open the belly of a toothed whale with its jaws. The megalodon that Jürgen Kurtz so desired to harpoon. Seagulls screeched overhead, periodically snatching small fish from the water. The ship slowed down, continuously scanning the ocean depths with its sensitive sonar. As we approached the Mariana Trench, large marine predators became more frequent. I'm no biologist, but at some point, I realized that the orcas and dolphins had disappeared. The ocean surface began to show more shark fins. Warm-blooded marine animals tend to avoid areas where sharks congregate, even ones as fearless and aggressive as orcas. It seemed we had reached our hunting ground. By noon, the yacht anchored near the largest island in the archipelago. I understood that Jürgen had decided to hunt here. In the morning, we scattered chunks of raw meat around the yacht, and soon more sharks appeared. Various kinds. Huge whale and great white sharks. Medium-sized blues and small cat sharks. But our client was only interested in the prehistoric megalodon. Many biologists believe this creature has survived in the Mariana Trench, hiding in the ocean floor's fissures. Jürgen peered impatiently at the sonar screen, waiting for the appearance of the giant prehistoric shark. "George, come here." Jürgen waved at me. "What do you think of this?" The owner gestured towards the water where a gigantic gray shadow of an enormous shark glided by. Through the clear water, the swift body piercing the depths with amazing agility and grace was clearly visible. Just then, the sailors began to throw chunks of meat into the water. The shark made a turn and, with the speed of a homing torpedo, approached its target. It quickly flipped onto its back to swallow a large piece of meat, then returned to its previous position and set off on another round. "See? Do you see?" Jürgen nearly screamed in excitement. "That's it, the prehistoric shark. The megalodon." I noticed that the sharks that had been circling the yacht had disappeared. Around us now swam only the prehistoric giant shark, approximately 14 meters long. Jürgen was already putting on a wetsuit. His assistant had a scuba tank and a powerful 2-barrel pneumatic spear gun for underwater hunting ready. "George, take the crossbow." Jürgen nodded towards a large, powerful crossbow lying near the wheelhouse. "Cover me if anything happens." "If anything?" "It would be fine if the shark stayed close to the water's surface so I could hit it. But what if it went deep? No crossbow bolt could penetrate the water's thickness." I nodded in response and started winding the crossbow, keeping an eye on the gigantic predator. The click of the lock sounded, and the bowstring was set. I inserted a heavy steel bolt into the groove and approached the gunwale. Jurgen was ready. He put on his mask and gave a thumbs up. A combat knife for underwater divers hung from his belt. "Going down," he shouted, his voice muffled by the mask. He descended the extended ladder to the water's edge and jumped, creating a spray of water. I shook my head. What was this, recklessness or desperate bravery? To confront a ferocious predator alone. A 6-meter great white shark's jaws were enough to bite a person in half. And this one was 14 meters with a mouth like a tunnel. Near the yacht's side bobbed a small boat. With the sailor's help, Doc and I descended the rope to its deck, and moments later, its powerful engine roared to life. Doc pulled away slightly to avoid hitting the hunter with the boat's hull and slowly followed him, keeping a distance of about 6 meters. The gigantic shark swallowed a piece of meat and began another round. Jurgen swam across its path, staying close to the water's surface. I could clearly see him aim and fire the spear gun. A bubble of compressed air burst out, carrying a half-meter harpoon that quickly reached the shark, embedding itself in its left eye. The shark jerked violently, trying to free itself from the steel splinter, but the hooks of the harpoon tied it to the steel rope. It tried to dive deep, dragging Jurgen, who held the gun, with it. That would mean certain death for Jurgen if it went deeper than 50 meters where the scuba gear was useless. I knew it was time to act. When the shark showed its head above the water again, I fired the crossbow. The heavy steel bolt struck its right, furiously glaring eye. The shark thrashed its head from side to side. Water around it turned red with blood. Suddenly, it turned and attacked the hunter. But being blind, it missed Jurgen, who managed to evade its attack line and hit the shark with a second harpoon. The shark instantly weakened, losing speed. At that moment, I fired the crossbow again. The heavy bolt crashed through its right gill. The predator jerked a few times, slapping the water's surface with its tail, then turned belly up and began to slowly sink to the bottom. A special device built into the harpoon released a signaling buoy. It unfurled into a huge red sphere and shot upward, keeping the lifeless body of the massive shark afloat. And then, the unexpected happened. I heard the rattling of a boat engine and a large junk appeared from behind the island, heading straight towards us. Doc noticed the vessel too. After quickly pulling Jurgen out of the water, we headed to the yacht. Barely on deck, shouts blared from the junk's loudspeaker, followed by a burst of gunfire into the air. We couldn't make out the words, but it was clear we were under pirate attack. It was time to show our capability. While Barkon and Los prepared their weapons, Doc and I removed the tarp from the machine gun and aimed it at the still shouting filibusters. The yacht spectators had vanished below deck, a good thing, to avoid stray bullets. The main goal was to prevent the scoundrels from getting too close to the yacht and hooking us with their ropes. I loaded the belt, closed the cover of the gun box, and cocked it. The face of the loudest pirate, likely their leader, was clear in my sights. Time to start. The junk sped towards us, closing the distance. Still far, almost a mile away, a line of water splashes rose about 50 meters from the yacht. Too far, but the junk was moving fast. Another line of water splashes, much closer to the yacht's side, followed by the sound of gunshots. I could see the machine gun turret pointed at us without binoculars. A burst of gunfire raked across Charlotte's wheelhouse, shattering 2 windows and scattering glass shards. The gunfire hit the yacht from left to right. The next round hit higher, damaging the satellite antenna and radar. Another burst thudded against the hull. The third round struck the yacht's side. Deciding the crew was sufficiently scared, the pirates slowed down and shouted something again through the loudspeaker. That's when I pressed the trigger. The German gun fired almost without recoil. Bullets accurately hit the targets. Pirates on the junk's bow fell like cut grass. The rest froze, not understanding what was happening. I raised the sight and fired again. Windows shattered in their superstructure. Surviving bandits tried to hide below deck. A crush started on the single ladder. I opened fire again. Wood chips from the deck and glass shards flew in all directions. Attacking trade ships was one thing, this was different. The junk began to turn, apparently losing interest in the robbery and rushing home. Slowly, it turned its right side towards us. A chance like this wouldn't come again. I shouldered the grenade launcher and aimed at the middle of the side, near the waterline. The grenade hit my target. The junk shuddered and began to list. Water flooded through the hole I'd made. The pirates turned, and the junk limped away like a wounded dog, desperately seeking refuge behind a cape. I managed to load a second grenade. The shot smoked the junk's engine. No further action was required. We ceased fire as the junk almost disappeared behind the cape. Having hoisted the giant shark on board, Charlotte set sail for Thailand and entered the port of Bangkok 3 days later. Jurgen went ashore to meet his arriving daughter, while we began packing. Our job was done, and we were soon to fly back to Kiev. We decided not to go ashore, staying on the yacht instead, its cabin quality and service as good as any 5-star hotel. Only 1 day remained until New Year. We sat in the mess room, celebrating the job's completion. The captain and his first mate joined us enthusiastically. Eventually, after all toasts were made and eyes began to betray fatigue, I excused myself and headed to my cabin. The room was dimly lit, but I didn't turn on the light. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw Charlotte emerging from the bathroom, apparently unclothed. On the table, an open bottle of champagne and 2 glasses awaited. Charlotte sat down, lighting a match briefly illuminating her beautiful face framed by tousled white hair. The bottle's neck clinked against the glass. I hardly tasted the drink. Charlotte wrapped her arms around my neck and pressed her body against mine. Then, silently, she took my hand and led me to the bed. I don't know why, but I lost the will to resist. And it happened again. There was no disappointment. I felt like a frigate captain who, after terrible storms and bloody battles, entered a peaceful harbor. When the young woman writhed in sensual pleasure in my arms, responding to my kisses timidly and then passionately. When the last barrier fell, and I, victorious, silenced her soft sound with a light kiss, a tenderness was born in my soul, a weary traveler finding what he'd long sought. In Charlotte's arms, both submissive and commanding, I suddenly understood what they call true love, the merging of souls and hearts beating in unison, not just the closeness of bodies and the entanglement of legs. And I also realized that we were never meant to be together. When I woke up, Charlotte was already gone. I got up to have some coffee in the cabin lounge. An hour later, a car came for us, and we, having loaded our few belongings into the trunk, headed to the airport. There, Jurgen and his daughter were waiting for us. Seeing Charlotte, I flinched. I already knew she was our client's sole heiress. Blood rushed to my head. I didn't expect such feelings from myself. Jurgen bid us a very warm farewell. He held my hand in his for a long time, as if he wanted to say something. Then Lorenz approached me. "May I have a word, George?" We stepped aside. I looked for Charlotte. She was standing with her father, her back turned to me. I looked questioningly at Lorenz. "You know, George," Lorenz whispered, "I've been working with Mr. Kerr for a long time. I love his daughter like my own. So, I have enough reasons to be involved in her fate." I listened silently, beginning to understand his implication. There are things a young woman of society cannot discuss with a man. So, as a friend, I took on this mission. Lorenz smirked. I understood what the conversation was about. No more hints left. I looked Lorenz in the eye. "Don't trouble yourself. You understand me, George? You speak English well, and I understand it perfectly." I ran my hand over my face. I'm not fit to be the husband of a brilliant heiress to a billion-dollar fortune. That's all. I have nothing but scars on my body and a small house where even her tiniest dog wouldn't want to live. "Your words do you honor," said Lorenz. "But the local mentality is different from yours. Such a marriage wouldn't be unusual here and would not cause any judgments you should be ashamed of. Unfortunately, I must still decline. I've had too good a vaccination against marriage. Admit it, all women are somewhat predictably the same. And I don't want to be another toy for a rich heiress. She'll play and then throw me away. I won't survive that again." "I understand," Lorenz sighed. "Well, goodbye." He shook my hand and went to Jurgen. Seeing his questioning look, he shook his head negatively. I showed my ticket, slung my bag over my shoulder, and headed to the plane. Why do I feel such bitter sorrow in my heart? A year had passed. It was late November, the off-season. Autumn was almost over, and winter hadn't yet arrived. But it was close, like a fierce predatory beast lurking, waiting to deliver the final, fatal blow. Its cold breath was already clearly audible. Snowfalls, frosts, blizzards, all were ready, just waiting for the command. Soon, it would all unleash upon us. But for now, I was awakened by the loud cawing of crows. It was a clear, frosty morning. A sunbeam, sneaking through the window, gently tickled my cheek. I sat up and put my feet on the floor. Lately, my spine had been aching in the mornings. Looking at the clock, I saw it was almost 8 in the morning. Rubbing my lower back, I approached the window. Opposite, on a bare apple tree, sat a crow. It kept tilting its head, as if trying to peek inside the hut. Then, after a final caw, it flapped its wings and lazily flew toward the forest. I quickly washed my face in the old copper basin. Ran my hand over my cheek. The stubble was still bearable, I could shave tomorrow. I put a frying pan on the stove, added some bacon slices, and soon the room was filled with the smell of sizzling fat. I cracked 3 eggs, sprinkled some onion. When the food was ready, I moved the pan to the table, placing a board underneath so as not to burn the oilcloth. I put the charred copper kettle on the stove. Vera had visited me recently. Over the past year, her radiant beauty had noticeably faded. Seems life with the Italian wasn't sweet. I wonder how she found me. But that's not important now. It's not important anymore. I've burned out inside. I had started to forget that I once had a wife and children. They were there, but they've drifted away. New husband, new father, new life. Vera drank tea with me, then sat silently for a long time. Finally, she asked, "If you hadn't caught me then with a lover, do you think we would still be together?" I just shrugged. I thought I heard regret and hope in her voice. Or maybe it was just my imagination. Then she lingered by her car, as if waiting for something, then got behind the wheel and disappeared from my life forever. I was finishing my breakfast when I heard a car. Who could it be this time? Not a forest, but a thoroughfare. I put on my coat and stepped onto the porch. 2 black Land Rovers briskly pulled up to my house. A young man got out of the first one and helped a blonde woman out. She took off her sunglasses and looked at me. I felt like I'd been scalded with boiling water. "Charlotte? What was she doing here?" She approached the porch. "I was passing by and decided to visit you." Charlotte looked into my eyes intently. "I have news." She turned to the second car. Jurgen and Lorenz got out, each carrying a bundle. "These are children," Charlotte continued calmly. And clarified, "Our children, twins, a girl and a boy. And if you think I'll just renounce their father, you're gravely mistaken." When I finally released her from my embrace, Jurgen and Lorenz were looking at us with wide smiles. What do you think of our final second part of the story? I think that the plot was revealed a lot more and we finally know what happened at the end of the first part. What do you think? Write your opinion about the first and second part in the comments. See you in the comments.